At Thanksgiving, my uncle mocked me. He'll probably ask for leftovers. So I shocked them all. I stayed quiet until my sister's boyfriend recognized me in seconds, pulled up proof, and the whole table froze mid-dinner. In my family, that relative was Uncle Roy. He wore sarcasm like cologne, thick, noticeable, and hard to ignore. And that year, as I walked into my parents' house with a bottle of cranberry cider under one arm and a pie I'd made myself in the other, his voice cut through the living room like a butter knife. "Well, look who finally showed up," Roy said, his lips twitching into a smirk. "He'll probably ask for leftovers before we even sit down." The room chuckled lightly. Everyone but me. I forced a smile, said nothing, and handed my pie to my cousin Kelly in the kitchen. It wasn't the first time Roy had made a dig at me in front of everyone, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I was used to it by now. My name's Nate. I'm 31. I own a small tech consulting business I started out of my college dorm. And though it's doing well now, more than well honestly, you'd never guess it from the way my family treats me. To them, I'm still the quiet one. The weird kid who always had his head in a laptop or sketch pad instead of playing catch in the backyard. My younger sister Melanie, on the other hand, she could do no wrong. She was the cheer captain, the homecoming queen, the straight A, a student who married young, divorced quietly, and was now dating a new guy the family was excited to meet. I hadn't been to a family Thanksgiving in 3 years. I'd skipped the last two after Mom called and said, "It's probably best if you focus on your work this year. You've been so distant." Distant in my family was code for, "You didn't play along when we made you the punchline." But this year, after some persuading from my cousin Kelly and a carefully worded email from Mom, I agreed to come back. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel how little had changed. The living room was packed. Cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors who always seemed to find their way over around dinner. The fireplace was lit, the football game was on, and the table was already set for what looked like 20 people. I scanned the room looking for a seat, or even just a place to put my code, but no one made much effort to greet me. Just a few nods, a half-hearted, "Hey, Nate," and then back to their conversations. In the kitchen, Kelly hugged me and said she was glad I made it. She was the only one who'd ever really understood me. We grew up more like siblings than cousins, spending summers playing video games and building forts out of sofa cushions while the rest of the kids were outside trying to be athletes. She glanced at me with a look I couldn't quite read. Part concern, part caution. "Melanie's bringing her boyfriend," she whispered, glancing toward the door. "Brace yourself. Everyone's already obsessed with him." I raised an eyebrow that fast. Kelly shrugged. "You know how Mom and Aunt Linda are? New guy walks in, smiles once, and suddenly he's family." I chuckled softly and opened the fridge to stash my cider. "What's he like?" Smooth Kelly said, wrinkling her nose. "Too smooth, like someone who practices compliments in the mirror." Just as I was about to ask more, I heard the front door open. The room quieted, then erupted with greetings and laughter. Melanie had arrived. I stepped into the hallway just in time to see her walk in, wrapped in a camel-colored coat. Her arm looped through the elbow of a tall guy in a navy blazer. He had that polished magazine cover look, chiseled jawline, expensive haircut, clean-shaven and confident. His eyes scanned the room like he already owned it. Everyone, Melanie beamed. "This is Carter." Carter. Of course his name was Carter. He gave a charming little wave and smiled. That kind of smile you usually see in toothpaste ads. One by one, the family fawned over him. Uncle Roy clapped him on the back. Aunt Linda offered him wine before he even took off his coat. And my mom had that sparkle in her eyes, the one she used to reserve for Melanie's ex-husband before he apparently became persona non grata. Carter's eyes landed on me briefly, then flicked away like I was just another lamp in the corner. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask my name. He didn't even nod. I stood there awkwardly before retreating to the kitchen again. The evening dragged on. Carter charmed every adult in the house. He helped Grandma with the mashed potatoes, showed the little cousins a card trick, and even helped Uncle Jerry fix the wobbly leg on the folding table. I watched all of it in quiet disbelief. The guy was running for family president, and he was winning by a landslide. Dinner was announced, and everyone scrambled for seats like it was musical chairs. I found a spot on the far end of the kids' table, which now hosted the leftovers, the unmarried cousins. The quiet ones, the ones who didn't bring a date. I didn't mind, honestly. It gave me space to think. As we ate, I kept noticing Carter glancing at me. It wasn't constant, but enough that I felt it. I wasn't sure what it meant. Maybe he finally realized I existed. Maybe he was just curious why no one had introduced us. Maybe deep down he was threatened by me. I doubted it, though. Dessert came around and Kelly passed me a plate of pumpkin pie. "Holding up okay?" she asked quietly. Fine, I said, though I didn't sound convincing. Then, just as I was taking my first bite, I heard it again. Uncle Roy loud as ever. You know, I bet Nate's just here for the leftovers. There was laughter. Someone muttered, well, he is the quiet type. And someone else added, he probably brought Tupperware. It wasn't funny, but I smiled anyway. That's what you do when you've been the family's punchline for most of your life. You smile and you wait for it to pass. But this time, it didn't pass. This time, someone across the table froze. Carter. He was staring at me now, really staring like he'd seen a ghost. Melanie nudged him gently. What's wrong? He didn't answer, his brow furrowed. Then slowly he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out his phone, and tapped it a few times with a shaky finger. That's him, he whispered. Melanie frowned. What? Carter looked at me again, then turned the phone around to show her something. She leaned in, squinted, and her face went pale. Next to her, my Aunt Linda, who had been sipping wine and laughing at a joke someone told, caught sight of the screen and let out a tiny gasp. Her hand trembled, her glass tilted, and in one quick motion, red wine splashed across the table and shattered on the hardwood floor. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, and I had absolutely no idea why, but I was about to find out. I didn't move at first, just sat there, fork suspended midair, confused as hell, while the room around me froze in place. Aunt Linda's broken wine glass lay scattered on the floor like a metaphor for whatever tension had just splintered through the air. Someone was whispering, too low to catch. Melanie's hand was clamped around Carter's wrist, and he was still holding out his phone, though he turned it slightly now, angling the screen away from me. Their eyes flicked between me and the image back and forth like they were trying to match a face to a mugshot. And I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling in my stomach that I was missing something big. Something that, judging by the reactions, I was the last person in the room to understand. Then Melanie leaned back in her chair and muttered, just barely above a whisper, You didn't tell me it was him. Carter still didn't say anything. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible anymore. I was something worse. I was recognized, and not in a good way. Okay, I said, my voice breaking through the silence like a cracked window pane. Someone want to let me in on the joke? No one laughed. No one spoke. Finally, Carter cleared his throat. You run a consulting firm, right? Software security. I nodded slowly. Yeah, that's right. What? He pressed his lips together, weighing his words. Do you ever do legal audits, internal breach reviews? My mind reeled. That wasn't exactly my bread and butter, but I'd taken a few private contracts over the years. Usually small companies looking to quietly identify leaks, backdoors, embezzlement, all hush-hush stuff. I was careful. Always signed NDAs, always made sure I didn't poke or I wasn't welcome. Carter set his phone face down on the table like it was radioactive. You did a contract last year with Linton Dynamics. And then it hit me. Linton. God, that job. It was one of the messiest I'd ever taken. An insider had been siphoning intellectual property and leaking prototypes to a rival firm. Took me weeks to trace it. I'd followed the trail through VPNs, burner accounts, cloaked servers, until I finally narrowed it down to an employee named Ethan Warren. Corporate brought the hammer down hard, terminated him the next day. I heard later they filed a civil suit, but that was where my involvement ended. Or at least I thought it did. Carter's eyes were dark now, his voice cold. That was my brother. My throat went dry. Oh, there it was. That connection, that thread that tied us in this sick little knot of coincidence. I had no idea, I said genuinely. I wasn't even given a name until the end. I just followed the data. He leaned back, folding his arms. Yeah, well, that data got my brother blacklisted. Couldn't get a job for 8 months. Ended up moving back in with our parents. Everything fell apart. I looked at Melanie, who was now staring at me like I was radioactive, like I'd poisoned her perfect little dinner with truth. You ruined someone's life, she said quietly, and something snapped in me. I did my job, I replied. Your boyfriend's brother was stealing trade secrets. I didn't frame him. I didn't falsify anything. I traced an IP address. I matched login logs. I cross-referenced security cameras and time-stamped file deletions. That's it. No, but it didn't matter. In that moment, the mood had turned. I could feel it like cold air creeping through a cracked window. To them, it didn't matter that I had followed protocol, that I had no clue who Ethan Warren was. All they saw now was me, the outsider, the weirdo who'd suddenly revealed he was more than they assumed. I wasn't just Nate, the guy who brought his own pie and laughed off Uncle Roy's jabs. I was the guy who ruined someone's family, and they hated me for it. The whispers started before dessert was even cleared. I heard my cousin Derrick mutter something about snakes in the grass. Aunt Linda kept casting glances at her wine-stained skirt like I was somehow responsible for her clumsiness. Even my mom's sweet. Quiet mom gave me a look that made my chest ache. It was disappointment. Real honest-to-God disappointment. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd upset the dynamic. I'd rattled the glass dome that kept our family delusions intact. The rest of the evening passed like a slow-motion car crash. No one asked me about work. No one complimented the pie I baked. No one even thanked me for coming. Carter, meanwhile, was treated like some wounded prince. Aunt Linda brought him fresh apple cider. Grandma asked him about his trauma. Melanie clung to his arm like he was going to evaporate. I stayed until the dishes were half cleared. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and told Kelly I'd text her later. As I walked toward the door, my father appeared at my side, his voice low. "You know," he said, "maybe next year. Just send a card or something." I blinked. "Excuse me." "You're always welcome," he added quickly. "Of course, but maybe a little less drama next time." I stared at him, at the man who, when I was 12, told me I'd never understand people because I spent too much time on computers. The man who once grounded me for fixing the family printer too well because he assumed I must have broken it first. He looked at me like I was the storm that ruined his picnic. And I realized something standing there in the hallway, coat half-zipped and heart lodged in my throat. They didn't want me here. Not really. They wanted the idea of me. The quiet Nate, the passive Nate, the Nate who ate whatever garbage they fed him, smiled politely and stayed invisible. But that Nate was gone. Or at least he was dying. I left without saying goodbye. The drive home was a blur. My phone buzzed a few times. Messages from Kelly, one from my uncle, probably an accidental butt dial, and one from an unknown number. It just said, "Hope you're proud. My brother still can't get work." No name, no signature, just that. I didn't reply. But I saved the number because deep down I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up to a group text from my mom. "Thank you everyone for a beautiful evening. So much love in one house. We are truly blessed." No mention of the wine glass. No mention of the Cold War that had silently unfolded across the table. No mention of me at all. But I noticed something else, a photo attached. It was the family gathered around the dinner table. Everyone smiling, glasses raised. Carter had one arm draped around Melanie's shoulder. Even Uncle Roy was midlife. There was one empty chair at the end. Mine. I stared at that photo for a long time. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clarity. This family had never really seen me. Not for who I was. They'd seen a placeholder, a scapegoat, a background character in the Melanie show. And for years, I'd accepted that. I'd made peace with being the quiet one. But now I was awake. Now I was done. And if they thought the drama ended with a snide remark and an awkward dinner, they were sorely mistaken because I hadn't even started yet. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check my emails or scroll through my messages or see how many comments had piled up in the family group chat. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my hands behind my head, and let the silence sit heavy on my chest. The photo, that cursed photo of everyone smiling around the table with that one empty chair at the far end. My chair, it kept flashing in my head like a screensaver. I couldn't turn off. Part of me wanted to laugh. I mean, what did I really expected? A hero's welcome? A warm hug? "Oh, we're proud of you, Nate. Please." I'd been invisible for so long that even my absence at the table didn't earn a second glance. Just a hole in the photo and a reminder that I didn't belong. But still it hurt. The deeper cut, though, was Dad's comment. "You're always welcome. But maybe a little less drama next time." That one kept echoing like a looped voicemail in my head. I hadn't brought drama. I hadn't even said anything at dinner. All I'd done was exist. And that alone had been enough to fracture the illusion they worked so hard to maintain. And that's when I realized I wasn't at rock bottom because of what happened at Thanksgiving. I'd already been at rock bottom for years. I just never noticed because I'd gotten comfortable living there. That was the first time in a long while that I actually cried. Not loud, not messy, just tears slipping out quietly while I stared up at the ceiling, because I wasn't sad for them. I was sad for me, for all the years I'd wasted trying to make people like that see me, respect me, love me, and they never would. Not really. Not unless I stayed in the little box they'd built for me, and I was done shrinking to fit. So that morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled out my old whiteboard from the back of the closet, dusted it off, and wrote one word in the middle in all caps. Build. I didn't know what it meant yet. Not fully, but I knew I needed something to ground me. A reason to stop letting other people define my worth. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work like a man possessed. Not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but because for the first time in forever, I realized how much I'd been holding back playing small, avoiding the spotlight out of some twisted loyalty to people who were only ever comfortable when I was beneath them. My consulting firm had been steady for years. I had 4 remote contractors, 2 regular clients, and a couple of passive income projects that brought in just enough to live comfortably. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive a Tesla. I didn't post motivational quotes on LinkedIn. I just solved problems and got paid for it. But something about Carter, about the way he looked at me when he realized who I was, lit a fire under me. That kind of fear, that kind of recognition. I wanted more of that. Not because I liked being feared, but because it meant I was finally seen. So I started saying yes to things I used to dodge. Bigger contracts, public case studies, a guest podcast appearance on a cybersecurity channel that used to terrify me just thinking about it. I rewrote my company's website from scratch, cleaned up the branding, hired a designer to make it look sleek. I dropped the passive freelancer tone and embraced the fact that I was a business owner. And slowly, things started to shift. By January, I'd landed a massive contract with a fintech company that needed a full audit of their internal systems. It was 6 figures stretched over 4 months and required me to hire 2 new people. I brought in Ava, a brilliant ex-NSA analyst, and Jay, a self-taught wizard from India who could crack any network in 10 minutes flat. We worked long hours, late nights, weekends. But for the first time in years, I loved it. I wasn't hiding anymore. And it wasn't just work. I started doing little things for myself again, stuff I hadn't made time for in years. I took long walks in the evening with a podcast in my ears and the cold air biting at my face. I signed up for cooking classes and learned how to make real ramen. I even joined a local meetup for tech entrepreneurs, even though networking events usually made my skin crawl. That's where I met Elise. She was quiet, sharp, and ran a startup focused on helping nonprofit orgs with digital infrastructure. We bumped into each other at the coffee table during a seminar on client scaling and ended up talking for an hour about how broken email marketing platforms were. We swapped numbers. 2 days later, we got faux. A week after that, we watched bad horror movies on her couch until 2 a.m. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was real and honest and calm. And for a guy who'd grown up in chaos, quiet love felt like revolution. Around March, I got an email that made me pause. It was from Melanie. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at it for 10 full minutes. She hadn't reached out since Thanksgiving, not even a Merry Christmas. And now this. Against my better judgment, I replied. She called that night. Her voice was softer than I remembered. More unsure, she apologized, said she'd had time to reflect, that Carter had twisted the story, that maybe she hadn't seen the full picture, that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been treated fairly by the family. But even as she spoke, I could feel it, the hesitation, the undercurrent of something unspoken. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, she said it. Carter's starting a new business, she said carefully. It's tech-based, cybersecurity adjacent. He wanted to see if you might advise. I didn't respond right away, not because I was surprised, but because I was trying to process the sheer audacity. After all that, after the silent treatment, the stares, the betrayal, now I was useful again. I'll think about it, I said flatly. But I already knew the answer. That night, I pulled out the whiteboard again, wrote a new word beneath build. Remember, because I knew myself. I knew how easy it would be to slip back into old patterns, to chase scraps of approval from people who didn't deserve it, to forget the way they made me feel when all I'd done was exist. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. 2 days later, I sent Melanie a polite decline. I told her I was busy, overbooked, couldn't take on new clients. She replied with a thumbs up emoji. No words, just that. I laughed when I saw it. And then I got back to work. By April, I tripled my revenue. By May, I was flying to New York to speak on a panel at a tech conference I used to watch on YouTube, like a dreamer peeking through glass. And when the family reunion invite showed up in June, signed by Uncle Roy himself, complete with a list of volunteer roles that needed filling. I smiled, folded it neatly, and dropped it in the shredder without a second thought because I wasn't done rising. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: opportunity for collaboration. It was from Carter Warren. I stared at the screen for a long while before opening it. The name alone felt like a ghost creeping through my inbox. After months of silence after the dinner, the text, the accusations, he had finally reached out himself. The body of the message was stiffly professional. No, hey Nate. No acknowledgement of our personal history, no reference to Thanksgiving or what had happened between us. Just a brief intro, a summary of his new tech venture, and a polite request to hop on a call and discuss potential synergies. It ended with his Calendly link. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and let it sink in. This wasn't just business. This was strategic. The kind of calculated move someone makes when they realize the only person who can help them is the one they tried to bury 6 months ago. And now they needed me. That's when the idea started to form. Not a full plan yet, just the spark of one. a quiet, glowing ember of possibility. Because here's the thing, I didn't need to ruin Carter. I didn't need to smear his name or dig up dirt or hack his project into oblivion. I just needed to let him talk, and that would be enough. I clicked the link and booked the call. Friday at 3 p.m. The next few days, I started preparing not just for the meeting, but for something bigger, something precise, patient. This wasn't just about Carter anymore. This was about the whole system that had propped him up, the family that had worshipped him instantly while dismissing me for decades. The people who had quietly tolerated my absence but tripped over themselves to accommodate his charm. I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to use him. But to do that, I needed intel. So I called Kelly. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Hey, stranger. You alive barely," I joked. "Hey, got a weird question." "Oh no," she said. "Is this going to be one of those family splitting questions or a how do you get curry out of a white shirt kind of thing? More like Carter related." There was a beat. Then, oof, what now? I explained the email, the proposed collaboration, the complete lack of accountability in his tone. Kelly listened quietly. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. "I'm not surprised. You know he's launching that startup, right?" Vaguely. "Yeah. Well, he's already pitching investors. Melanie keeps posting vague little humble brags on Instagram. Proud of what he's building. Can't wait to share that kind of thing." I rolled my eyes. "Do we know what the actual product is?" Kelly laughed. "Something about secure communication." "I don't know. Melanie tried explaining it to me at lunch and used the word blockchain 6 times. I think even she doesn't get it." "Sounds about right. And he's using family money. I think Aunt Linda invested. Uncle Roy, too." That made my eyebrow twitch. So they were literally investing in him now. I chewed on that. "Would you mind," I asked, carefully keeping an eye on what they post? Anything public? Anything shady? "You're planning something," Kelly said immediately. "Your voice does this thing when you're scheming. It gets all flat." "Maybe," I said. "I'm just watching for now." She paused. "Do I get to be your sidekick?" I grinned. "You already are." The call on Friday started off dull. Carter logged in 2 minutes late, his face perfectly lit, his background clean, and curated, probably a rented co-working space with fake books on the shelf behind him. He wore a tailored jacket over a t-shirt. Silicon Valley cosplay at its finest. "Nate," he said, nodding. "Appreciate you making the time." "Sure," I said. "Curious what you're working on." He launched into a rehearsed pitch, his voice smooth. Confident, practiced a new app that would revolutionize private communication, decentralized architecture, end-to-end encryption, AI-enhanced threat detection. All the buzzwords. He name-dropped investors he was in talks with, mentioned a few strategic partners, and casually floated the idea of bringing on someone with a strong forensic background to audit the core security before launch. That someone, obviously, was me. But here's what stuck out. His platform wasn't ready. In fact, it wasn't even built. He was pitching wireframes and vaporware, just a glossy deck and a few UI mockups. The back end wasn't done. The encryption libraries were open source with no custom implementation. And the AI threat detection, pure fantasy at this stage. I kept my face neutral the whole time. When he finished, I asked a few questions, basic ones, deliberately naive. He answered confidently, but his replies were vague, non-technical. He didn't understand the infrastructure he was claiming to build, which meant one thing. He was lying to someone, either the investors, the family, or both. After 30 minutes, we wrapped. "I'll think about it," I told him. "Appreciate the walkthrough." "Of course," he said, smiling. "Would love to have someone like you on the team." As the call ended, I took a screenshot of the deck he'd shared on screen. Just a glimpse, but enough to trace. Over the next week, I began digging quietly, carefully, using the few details from the deck and the company name he dropped, Cypher said. I found their website. It was sleek but hollow, full of aspirational language and empty promises. I ran a WH lookup on the domain, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Classic. Then I searched public business registries. Carter wasn't listed as a founder. Some guy named Victor Harper was, a name I didn't recognize. I dug deeper. Victor Harper had 2 other LLCs, both dissolved. One had been investigated for securities fraud, quietly. No charges filed. I started connecting the dots. This wasn't just a tech bro with a dream. This was a puppet, or worse, a front. And Carter, he was either clueless or complicit. Either way, it was gold. By the end of the month, I'd assembled a neat little folder of everything I'd found. Investor slides, fake metrics, registration details, and even a few public testimonials on the website that, when reverse image searched, turned out to be AI-generated headshot. I had the kindling now. I needed the match. That's when Kelly came through again. She texted me a screenshot from Melanie's Instagram. It was a boomerang video of champagne flutes clinking over a caption that read, "Celebrating our seed round $350,000 raised and just getting started." That was the confirmation I needed. They weren't just talking to investors anymore. They had funding, and they were using that funding based on false claims, fake prototypes, and fake endorsements. Legally, that was a minefield. I consulted a lawyer I knew, a discreet, brilliant guy named Marco I'd worked with during the Linton job. I told him I had a client who might be exposed to an investment built on deceptive materials. I didn't name names, I just asked what the reporting thresholds were. Marco didn't even hesitate. If someone's misrepresenting their product to raise money and you can prove it, you have enough to go to the SEC or even the FDC, depending on the scale. Investors can sue for damages. Founders can be held liable. I nodded slowly. Even if it's just family and friends investing, doesn't matter. Fraud is fraud. I thanked him. Then I called Kelly again. I need names. I said everyone in the family who's put money into CipherSet. She didn't ask why, just said, "Give me a day." When she got back to me, the list was longer than I expected. Uncle Roy, $50,000. Aunt Linda, $35,000. Grandma, even $10,000. One of our cousins, $25,000 from his college fund. They'd all bet on Carter. And none of them knew they were holding a grenade. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. I wasn't going to ruin Carter out of spite. I was going to shine a light on the truth. Let the consequences fall where they may. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was strategizing. And the next move was mine. I didn't confront anyone right away. That was the hardest part. Sitting on the truth while everyone around me strutted, bragged, and congratulated themselves. Melanie kept posting updates about late nights and building something meaningful. Aunt Linda shared an article about women supporting startups, tagging Carter and adding a heart. Uncle Roy told anyone who would listen that he'd finally invested in something that mattered. And I let them, because the thing about truth is, it doesn't need theatrics. It just needs timing. The moment came sooner than I expected. In early July, I got an email invitation that made me laugh out loud. CipherSet was hosting a friends and family progress night, a casual showcase, light demos, drinks, networking. Melanie forwarded it to me with a chirpy note. "You should come. Carter would love to show you what they've built." That line, "what they've built," sealed it. I replied, yes, not because I wanted to reconcile, not because I wanted approval, but because this was the cleanest way to end it. The event was held in a rented event space downtown, all exposed brick and hanging lights. The kind of place that looked impressive in photos and hollow in reality. There was a banner with CipherSet's logo printed far too large for the room, a folding table with branded pamphlets, and a monitor looping the same animated mock-up over and over. I arrived 10 minutes early. Carter spotted me immediately. His smile froze for half a second before snapping back into place. He walked over, hand outstretched, voice booming like we were old friends. "Nate, glad you could make it." I shook his hand, calm, polite, wouldn't miss it. Melanie hugged me next. "Too tight, too rehearsed." "I'm really glad you're here," she said, as if that erased months of silence. "Me too," I replied. The room filled quickly. Family, a few local business people, and this surprised me. 2 men in suits who definitely weren't relatives. One of them was Victor Harper. I recognized him immediately from my research. Same face, same slick confidence, same eyes that never quite settled on anyone. Carter took the stage around 7. He gave a speech about vision, trust, and the future of privacy. He talked about integrity, about doing things the right way. I watched Uncle Roy nod along, arms crossed, proud. Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes like she was watching a graduation. When Carter finished, the room applauded, glasses clinked, music came back on. Then Carter said, "And now we're going to do a brief live walkthrough of our security framework. Nate here has been advising us informally, and he's agreed to say a few words." That was new. Melanie turned to me, eyes wide. "What?" I stood up slowly. Carter smiled at me, the same smile he'd worn at Thanksgiving. Confident, certain. He thought he'd put me on the spot. Thought I'd freeze or deflect or play small like I always used to. Instead, I stepped forward. "Thanks, Carter," I said evenly. "I actually haven't advised CipherSet, but since everyone's here, I think it's a good time to clarify a few things." The room quieted. I plugged a flash drive into the monitor. The screen changed. Instead of CipherSet's looping animation, a simple slide appeared. "Let's start with the basics." I said, "This platform claims end-to-end encryption." It does not. It uses an unmodified open-source library with known vulnerabilities. Last patched 18 months ago, murmurs is... Carter stiffened. "Nate, this isn't..." I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." Next slide. These user testimonials generated stock photos reverse searchable. Another slide. These performance metrics projections presented as current data. That's misrepresentation. Victor Harper shifted uncomfortably. I kept going. Calm, precise. No insults, no emotion. I explained the shell company, the dissolved LLCs, the lack of a working back end, the absence of any proprietary security architecture. Then I turned to the room. If you invested in CipherSet based on these claims, you were not given accurate information. Silence. Aunt Linda looked at Uncle Roy. Uncle Roy looked at Melanie. Grandma's hands trembled in her lap. Carter finally snapped. This is a personal attack. No, I said this is documentation. Victor stepped forward, then trying to take control. We can explain. That won't be necessary, said one of the men in suits. He stood pulling out a badge. SEC, he said simply. We've been reviewing CipherSet for a few weeks. This presentation confirms several concerns. The room erupted. Questions, gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Melanie looked like she'd been slapped. Carter went pale. Victor started talking fast. Too fast. The agents asked for documents. Phones, laptops. I stepped back, letting it unfold without me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched the truth do what it always does when it finally gets air. The fallout was swift. CipherSet's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Investors were notified. Lawyers got involved. Victor disappeared within a week. Carter was left holding the wreckage. Family group chats exploded. Uncle Roy called me 23 times. I didn't answer. Aunt Linda left a voicemail crying, asking how I could do this to family. Melanie showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red, voice shaking. You humiliated us. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something close to peace. I didn't humiliate you, I said. I told the truth. You just weren't ready to hear it. She left without another word. The investigations dragged on for months. Some money was recovered, some wasn't. Relationships fractured. Blame bounced around like a pinball. And me, I went back to my life. Work flourished. My firm grew. Elise stayed. Kelly stayed. The people who mattered didn't question my choices, they understood them. Thanksgiving came around again. I didn't get an invite, I didn't need one, because for the first time I wasn't the quiet one at the end of the table. I wasn't the punchline, I wasn't invisible. I was just finally